Sachs.
I'm going to learn Pilates and be an influencer.
All right. Last week we talked about TikTok and this first bipartisan hearing we've seen in a long time. And people actually, I think, framing correctly exactly how dangerous it is, in my opinion, to have TikTok in the United States. And of course, then we get the great disappointment of the actual bill. The Restrict Act was proposed by Senator Mark Warner, Democrat, Virginia, on March 7th. The problem with it is it seems like it's poorly worded, that there will be civil penalties and criminal penalties to Americans for breaking the law and using software that's been banned. And many people said, this probably is just bad language.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does this apply to incognito mode? Because if it doesn't, I don't care.
Incognito mode is not this would basically.
No, they're saying that you can get fined or 20 years in jail or whatever it is for using a VPN to TikTok.
Freeberg, what are your thoughts on it?
Look, I think this is a real threat to the open internet. I'm really concerned about the language that's been used that basically speaks to protecting the safety and security of the American people by actively monitoring network traffic and making decisions about what network traffic is and isn't allowed to be transmitted across the open internet. It's the first time that I think in the United States, we are seeing like a real threat and a real set of behaviors from our government that looks and feels a lot like what goes on in China and elsewhere, where they operate with a closed internet, an internet that's controlled, monitored, observed, tracked, and gates are decided by some set of administrators on what is and isn't appropriate. And the language is always the same. It's for safety and security of the people. The entire purpose of the internet is that it did not have bounds, that it did not have governments, that it did not have controls, that it did not have systems that are politically and economically influenced, that the architecture of the internet was and always would be open. The protocols are open. The transmission of data on that network would be open. And as a result, all people around the world would have access to information of their choosing. And it allowed ultimate freedom of choice. This kind of is the first of what I'm concerned creates a precedent that ultimately leads to a very slippery slope. Saying that TikTok cannot make money in the US by charging advertisers or managing commerce flows is one thing. That's where the government can and should and could, if they chose to, have a role. But I think going in and observing, tracking internet traffic and making decisions about what is and isn't appropriate for people, I think is one of the things that we all should be most concerned about what's going on right now. There is no end in sight to this if you allow this to happen in the first time. VPNs, virtual private networks, allow you to anonymously access internet traffic and access internet traffic via remote destinations, so that the ultimate consumption of content that you're using can't be tracked and monitored by local agencies or ISPs. And I think that saying that can now be restricted takes away all ability to have true privacy and all rights to privacy on the open internet. So I'd love to talk about this more. Unfortunately, I got to run. But
great seeing
this
you.
is a super threat to me. And I think this is something we should be super, super concerned about, and that the entire community of technology, internet, and anyone that wants to have freedom of choice steps up and says, this is totally inappropriate and overreach.
Yeah.
There are other ways to manage stuff like this.
Feels like complete overreach, Sachs.
Yeah,
Do you think this is
I agree
just
with this.
intentional overreach or poorly written or somewhere in between? What do you think?
Both. I think both. I think this is the biggest bait and switch that Washington, the central government, has ever tried to pull on us. Everybody thinks that they're just trying to ban TikTok from operating in the U.S. And if that's all they did, then I think the bill would be supported by most Americans. But that's not what they're doing. They're not restricting TikTok. They're restricting us.
That's not the goal here. Yeah. What a bait and switch.
It's a huge bait and switch. And so just so you know, what the act provides is that a U.S. citizen using a VPN to access TikTok could theoretically be subjected to a maximum penalty of $1 million in fines or 20 years in prison or both. Now, they'll say, Mark Warner, the sponsor of the legislation, will swear up and down that's not the intent. But the problem is that the language of the bill is so vague that some clever prosecutor may want to pursue this theory one day, and that needs to be stopped. Also, there's another problem with the bill, which is you think this is just about TikTok. It's not. What they do is, it says here, I guess they don't want to mention TikTok by name, so they're trying to create a category of threatening application. But because it is a category, it's very, very broad. So the bill states that it covers any transaction, not just an app, in which an entity described in subparagraph B has any interest, and then entities described in subparagraph B are, quote, a foreign adversary, an entity subject to the jurisdiction of or organized under the laws of a foreign adversary, an entity owned, directed, or controlled by either of these. And then it gives the executive branch the power to name a foreign adversary, any foreign government regime that one of the cabinet secretaries defines without any vote of Congress. So this is giving sweeping powers to the executive branch to declare, foreign companies to be enemies.
This feels like the plot of the prequels in Star Wars.
Well,
Emergency
like
powers,
said,
here we go.
we criticize China for having a great firewall. What do you think this is? Yeah,
I mean, this should obviously have nothing to do with the American consumer and everything to do with a foreign adversary collecting data of Americans at scale. This could be written in a much simpler way.
Yeah, you know what it should be? It should be one sentence, which is that app stores are prohibited from allowing TikTok to be an app in their store. That's what they do in India. That's it. Yeah. Case closed. Yeah. Game over.
I think India's doing okay, right? They block like 100 Chinese apps, and I think their society's still functioning. So, all due respect to AOC, like the idea that 150 million Americans are going to suffer because they can't be tracked by the CCP is kind of nuts.
This is going to give sweeping powers to the security state to surveil us, to prosecute us, to limit our internet usage. This is basically the biggest power grab and bait and switch they've ever tried to pull on us. And again, if they really were concerned about TikTok, it's one sentence.
Yeah.